What's up guys, welcome back to another GGF video review, and today we're taking a look at yet another O11 case from LIAN. This is the O11 EVO RGB. Now it's only a bit over a week left in 2023 and we are still doing case reviews on LIAN cases. I think a few weeks ago there was the O11 Vision PCMR edition. I did miss that one, I was overseas. I think a few months before that we had the EVO XL, and then I can't even remember what we had before that. But anyway, this is the EVO RGB, and as the name states, there's RGB that runs along the top and the bottom and also the front as well. Now, this case isn't a direct replica of the original EVO. I would say it's been pretty much designed from the ground up. There's quite a few changes, so let's jump in and take a look. With only days before Christmas, we find LIAN are still at it with yet another case launch, the O11 EVO RGB. The EVO RGB has around the same footprint as the original EVO, but has been built from the ground up. You'll find similar features to the recently launched EVO XL, but the EVO RGB is smaller, dropping most of the 420 radiator support. The reason LIAN has put RGB in the naming this time is that this is one of the new features this chassis is showcasing. RGB strips are implemented top and bottom at the front and also top and bottom along the main side panel. This is nicely diffused, and I feel it's just the right amount of lighting to have around your case. If you decide to leave it off, you barely even notice the LED strips are there. The EVO RGB comes in LIAN's typical color styling, the all black, which we'll be reviewing today, and then the white version, which has the clear side panels and grey cable grommets. Unfortunately, sampling for the EVO RGB was quite limited this time. We only have the black model in-house for this review. For the black model, you'll find the brushed aluminum strip on the front and flowing over the top, and on the white, like always, this cover strip is just painted white. Dimensions come in at 473 high, 290 wide, and 493 deep, including the protruded PSU and hard drive chamber at the rear. I'll talk about why these stick out 15mm from the rear a little bit later. Compared to the original O11 EVO launched a few years back, overall exterior dimensions are nearly identical, give or take 10mm here and there. 4mm thick tempered glass side panels can be found on both the front and the main side. These have LIAN's usual dark tint to them and are locked into place by pushing clips. No secondary locking options for these panels can be found like seen on their previous cases. This is due to the diffused RGB strips running around the top. There is absolutely no way to lock them down from the top. I did find once the panels were installed, there was no way these could easily unclip. They really need a good pull to be removed. In helping do this are two notches at the rear which help allow you to pull the panels off. The bottom notch is for when the case is inverted. That one then becomes the top. The rear panel is made from steel and pops on and off the same way. Just like on the EVO XL, which was launched a few months back, the EVO RGB features chamfered edges on the glass side panel, which definitely gives it that premium look. Another reason this has been done, just like on the EVO XL, this chassis can have the corner pillar removed. This support pillar is installed for shipping rigidity, and I suggest building your system with the bar in and just remove it at the end. I must say, with the corner pillar removed, this area has definitely been beefed up a bit from when I tested it on the EVO XL. As you can see, there is nearly no flex at all. Even then, as soon as you pop the front glass on, it will support this corner anyway. For dust filters, only one can be found at the very bottom of the chassis. This is magnetic and just pops off. I would have liked to have seen two additional magnetic dust filters installed on the inside of the rear side panel that covers the PSU area as well as the side fan location, just like how we saw on the EVO XL. The front I/O can be found at the bottom, which includes just two USB 3.0 Type A ports, a USB Type C port, and a headphone combo port. Let us know if you think LIAN should have added a few more USB to this front module like on the EVO XL. And just like on LIAN's past 4 or so cases, this module is also removable. I've covered this in all my previous O11 case reviews, so I won't cover it again this time, but this module can be relocated from the front to either the left side or at the right rear of the chassis. Power, reset and power LED can be found on the right side at the front, and this time we find a few extra RGB controls. These include mode to cycle up and down the different modes, then color to cycle through all the colors, and lastly a brightness button, which I think is a great idea. The only way to have been able to adjust brightness on previous O11 cases was to offload it to the motherboard via software control. And if you wish to use your motherboard's RGB software, this can still be done as well. inside the EVO RGB, and this is a layout I'm sure just about everybody is familiar with, and it's been nearly 6 years since we were first introduced to the very original O11 Dynamic. Materials are mostly made of steel for the case frame and plastic for the feet and dust filter. Before we take a look at motherboard support, one interesting feature is the ability to install your motherboard at 2 different heights. Instead of on the EVO XL, where the whole motherboard tray was removed and then reinstalled higher or lower, the EVO RGB simply has 2 sets of motherboard standoffs. I find this quite genius, and without the need of having a complex removable and adjustable motherboard tray, as that is just going to increase overall cost. By default, the motherboard standoffs come pre-installed in the lower position, which are indicated by a down arrow on the tray. Then you can remove all standoffs and reinstall again in the holes that are indicated with an up arrow for the upper position. The difference between the 2 positions is roughly 20mm, which is 1 PCI slot. This will definitely come in handy when installing large radiators at the top. And for the rear I/O to move up and down, you might wonder, how is this possible? The EVO RGB just has a larger I/O area to accommodate both positions, and a blanking plate is installed at either the top or bottom depending on which position you go with. The EVO RGB supports up to E80X motherboards, but just like on the original EVO, E80X boards do hang over and protrude into the side radiator location, but I don't think it's enough to cause any 24-pin or any other cable fitment issues. Even with the 60mm thick EK-X360M with fans installed, and with the right angle 24-pin on the X670E ROG Extreme, the cable was tight, but it did install. Also, as cable grommet holes are side mounted, there's no issue of covering up cable routing if going with larger boards. Now moving down to standard ATX boards, there is no overhanging at all, and probably more suited for this chassis. 2 large cable grommets can be found at the top to accommodate EPS and fan headers. 2 large cable grommets can also be found at the bottom to cover all your USB, fan headers and I/O cables, and this covers just about the entire length of the board. Same goes for the edge cable grommets, this covers nearly the full length as well. GPU length, you'll have no issues here, and you'll find support for up to 450mm of clearance to the front glass panel for air-cooled GPUs, or you'll find 285mm for GPU length to the start of the side radiator location. As you can see, this 4090 Strixer with an Optimus block doesn't even come close to protruding into the side radiator location. Even if it did, there's roughly 150mm of side radiator and fan thickness to where it would then hit the GPU. For GPU width for water blocked cards, there's about 155mm before it will hit the side panel, and CPU cooler height for anyone going air cooled in this chassis is 165mm. LIAN also offers a vertical GPU bracket. This one is compatible with quite a few of their cases. I also tested the original O11 EVO vertical riser kit, and this one works as well. This new kit is also bundled with the Gen 4 riser cable. I had no issues installing this, and this bracket supports up to 4 slot GPUs. There's also 3 positions for the riser cable, and I guess being designed for multiple cases, using these other positions may work, but on the EVO RGB there is no way to do this, as you can only use the riser in its default first position due to display cable access being blocked. With this vertical bracket in its highest position, the first PCI slot, there is roughly 52mm of clearance under for radiator and fans. Rigidity of this bracket overall is quite good, with basically no sag at all. LIAN also include the new GPU anti-sag bracket in the EVO RGB. This one is similar to their popular GB001 bracket, but this one is easier to adjust, as this is exactly the same as the one that comes with the EVO XL. I covered this in detail on that video, and we'll put a link to that up in the corner. Around the back of the EVO RGB, we find yet again LIAN's cable cover door, which is locked in by 2 strong magnets. Hopefully these are enough to hold cables down, as there is no other secondary locking option to fully secure this door. This cable management door can also be removed via 4 screws if you wish. For PSU support, LIAN state the maximum here is 220mm. This ROG Thor I'm using here is 190mm long, and I wouldn't want to go much longer than that before things get tight. With this ROG Thor installed, there's 95mm of clearance here, and that's not including PSU cables. Now I can see why they've made the PSU area extrude out the back. This might seem a bit odd, but in reality, this isn't really going to affect anything externally, as once you plug in all your I/O cables, your case never sits flush against the wall anyway. One thing I do like, and a feature that was dropped on the EVO XL, is that PSU and storage areas can be swapped. Simply unscrew each cage and swap them around. This allows you to install your PSU at the top if you wish, and there's still plenty of room for EPS cables to pass through. LIAN have also brought back the motherboard tray CPU cooler cutout, which was also dropped on the EVO XL. Rear cable management has been kept simple with nothing over the top, definitely not to the same caliber as on the EVO XL, but the EVO RGB isn't in the same scope of that chassis. 5 main Velcro cable ties can be found, with 2 being on adjustable plates. These plates can be switched around or removed altogether if using a longer PSU. For storage, the EVO RGB can hold a total of 4 3.5-inch hard drives or 8 2.5-inch SSDs. Above the PSU area, a dual hard drive cage can be found, and with just about every new O11 release, LIAN has altered this area in some way. This time we find a total of 2 cages that a drive slots into, and then this cage slots into the case and is locked in. As heat has always been an issue in this area with mechanical drives, nearly all of this area is comprised of mesh to help tackle that. I had no issues with these cages supporting all types of hard drives, and they can also take an SSD instead of a 3.5-inch drive. The next storage location is on the side radiator spot, and here you'll find 2 toolless clip-on covers. Each cover supports 1 3.5-inch hard drive or 2 2.5-inch SSDs. I would say this area is probably the least option used, but it is nice these covers are included. Personally, I would much rather use this area for fans or a radiator, but if you need 4 3.5-inch drives, then this spot will be needed. And the final spot for storage is on the cable cover door. This area supports 2 2.5-inch SSDs, which are installed on the inside of the door in a toolless setup. Moving on to fan and radiator support, the EVO RGB supports 140 or 120mm fans in all locations, which includes 3 at the top, 3 at the bottom, and 3 on the side, bar the rear, which is only up to 120. One thing to note when using 140mm fans at the bottom greater than 25mm in thickness, like these new LIAN TL140s, the motherboard needs to be in its upper position for fans to clear. But for 140 25mm thick fans, they just manage to clear with the motherboard in its lowest position. For all-in-one cooler support, the top is the only location in the EVO RGB that supports 420mm radiators, and for 420 radiator to be installed, including both all-in-one coolers and custom radiators, the supplied 420 brackets need to be used. This is because the top radiator area is recessed, and installing a 420 radiator directly to the top bracket will not work. The supplied brackets simply bridge the gap and allowed my test Thermaltake 420 radiator to install just fine. Or another option you can do is ditch the supplied brackets and use fans to bridge this gap. Both options work the same way. Moving down to a 360mm all-in-one cooler, I had no issues installing my EK Nucleus 360 in the top and side locations. For custom liquid cooling support, I'd like to thank EK for supporting all the radiators for this review. I've decided to go with white radiators for the review side of things to make it easier to see them installed in the case. I'll also be using the motherboard in its default position, which is the lower option when visually showcasing radiator fitment, but I'll have both measurements on the screen for both motherboard positions. I'll get the top position out of the way first, and once again, this is the only location that supports up to 420 radiators, and that same supplied 420 radiator bracket is required. Or as I said earlier, you can ditch the brackets and use fans instead. This bracket is removable and is dropped in from the top. One improvement in this area over the original EVO is that fans or radiators can still be installed without the need of removing this bracket. On the original EVO, the chassis frame was obstructing one side of the bracket, thus meaning even if you wanted to install just 1, 2, or 3 fans at the top, the bracket had to be removed every time. This was community feedback that LIAN has listened to. Just to note that only 360 radiators or lower can be installed on this bracket outside the case. 420 radiators must be installed on the bracket already installed on the case, as they are physically larger than the cutout. Total clearance down to the motherboard is 104mm. Here I was able to install an EK P420M 44mm thick radiator with fans on the supplied 420 bracket, and as you can see, it still clears the motherboard. The only issue here is the EPS cable routing to the motherboard is going to be nearly impossible, but I was able to install non-EPS sleeve cables just. Personally, I would only go with a 420mm radiator if I was using an all-in-one cooler, as those radiators aren't as wide. Dropping down to a 360 radiator at the top, we see overall fitment is much better here, and we don't need the supplied brackets. This EKX 360M 58mm thick radiator comfortably fits inside the top radiator bracket, and once with fans installed, there's plenty of room here for EPS cables to be installed. Moving down to the bottom radiator spot, and this bracket is also removable and is done so by removing just one thumb screw. This bracket supports up to 360mm radiators, and clearance here will depend on what PCIe devices you have installed. As radiators can run up past your motherboard, I had 126mm of clearance here for radiator and fans using a 4090 FE with an EK block, and with another EKX 360M 58mm thick radiator and fans, we still have plenty of clearance. The side radiator location once again uses LIAN toolless quick release removable bracket, which has 4 orientations. 2 orientations adjust the radiator positioning left and right, closer or further away from the motherboard, while 2 orientations adjust the depth of this bracket, giving you split room for clearance in both the rear chamber and the main chamber, or the other option is having all the clearance solely in the main chamber. With an EKX 360M radiator installed at both the top and bottom, and the side radiator bracket in its default middle position, I had 81mm of clearance to the top radiator and 88mm of clearance to the bottom radiator. The reason why these measurements are different is because I could not get the EK radiator to install in the first row of mounting holes in the top radiator bracket, thus the offset difference. EK radiators are slightly wider than other brands, so this may not be an issue for you. Back chamber clearance with the side radiator bracket in the default middle position is 38mm. This is enough room for say fans, a slim radiator, or a DDC pump from something like an EK FLT. And just to note that D5 pumps do not fit in this back chamber. With the side bracket flipped around, this option now gives us all the clearance in the main section and none in the rear chamber. I now had 112mm of clearance to the top radiator and 119mm of clearance to the bottom radiator. Once again, the clearance difference being due to the top radiator being installed one slot over. Up to 360mm radiators are supported on the side radiator bracket, and testing yet another EKX 360M 58mm thick radiator with the side bracket in its middle position is where things started to get tight when installing fittings. The only way to overcome this was to install fittings and fans in the rear chamber, as we do have that 38mm of clearance back here. But if you flip this bracket around, the EKX 360M 58mm thick radiator fits much better with fittings and fans installed on the main side. We just lose the rear chamber clearance behind the radiator. Alrighty guys, before we wrap this video up, let's take a look at the final build. So that is the final build there. Now something you may have noticed during this build is I did use the brand new LIAN TL LCD fans. So the 3 on the side are the new LCD fans, and then the top and bottom are still the new TLs, but they're not the LCD fans. You have to bear in mind that you don't have to go with the LCD fans for all of your fans, because basically you're not going to see the ones at the top, and you may or may not see the ones at the bottom. So I haven't had much chance to play around with them. This was the first time setting up this system, playing around with them, and it is pretty neat. You can do like the temperature display, you can do like animated GIFs, you can do stock images, and then you can do videos as well. And they come in all of your variations. They come in white and black, they come in 140s, they come in 120s, and they come in reverse flow and normal flow. So that's for the TL non-LCDs and also the TL LCDs. So the ones on the side I have are reverse flow, so they're going in, and then the bottom are going in, up, and then the top and the rear are both going out. So I'll talk a little bit more on the build after I cover a few other things. Now, I did mention earlier that the rear side panel on the back here, they didn't include any dust filters like on the EVO XL. Now, I reached out to LIAN about this, and I was kind of thinking along this direction, and it was right that the whole formation and the density on the EVO series of cases, the EVO and the EVO RGB and then the original EVO, is a lot more dense than on the XL. So that's why on the EVO XL they have provided those dust filters, whereas on this one the mesh pattern is very fine, so they didn't really need it, although it's not going to be as good as actual dust filters, but they thought that they didn't need to have those included. Now, the cable management around the back, once again, LIAN have been doing these cases for a very long time now. Now, I had no issues. That cable management door works well. I would say the magnets aren't super strong. If you do have something protruding, it's obviously not going to push it straight away closed. So you're just going to make sure you have all your cables all zip tied up, and then once that door is closed, this system looks very neat at the back. And then I added the FLT down the bottom as well. Now you might be wondering, why did I add the FLT reservoir around the back? And that's another thing with these LCD fans, that you don't want to obstruct your fans now. I guess previously, if you had standard RGB fans or non-RGB fans, it wasn't so much of an issue if you threw a reservoir in front, you had some tubing going on. So I had to make sure this whole area around here, bar this run, I was going to do it so this rad was flipped around and this run came over to this end, but it was going to be a bit tight and I wanted to keep it flowing. So that's the only tube that could hinder the view on those screens, and that's pretty much it. So you have to remember now that you got to keep that area, or wherever you're going to be putting those LCD fans, you got to make sure it's clear so you can see them. But yeah, no issues with the cable management. Another issue that was with the original EVO I reviewed, I don't know how many years back, was that side radiator bracket when you are running something like an FLT without the brackets that make it stick out. So if you put a FLT, which is the reservoir with the pump sticks on the back, if you put it flush against that rad bracket, it will hit the, it's just the way it's been designed. There's like a brace at the bottom and a brace at the top. No matter which way you do it, you have to either have the pump below it, which it won't do because there's not enough room. So you have to put the pump above that horizontal brace, and that makes your FLT, if you're using a 360, goes all the way up the top, and the ports are literally right at the top. So you could cut it out if you wanted to allow the pump to fit in, but that's just one thing to keep in mind. Now, some other things I didn't cover, there are some more optional extras you can get, and there's also the inverted layout. I didn't want to cover that because it is literally exactly the same as the EVO XL. It's exactly the same as the original EVO. You basically need to take off this front fascia strip at the top. You take off your top cover here, of course, all your side panels you take off. You take out both of your rad brackets, because when you flip it upside down and put it all together, you actually can't get access to the rad brackets. So you actually take out both of your rad brackets. You can leave the side one, and then you have to feed the front IO back out through the bottom, because this bottom is actually completely independent to the case. So you take out the IO cable from the bottom, then you undo these screws, then you slide it forward, then you can flip the case upside down, lock it back in, and then you can put it all back together. Basically exactly the same. Now, one other optional extra is the upright GPU bracket. I didn't want to cover this as well because I didn't want to bulk out the main review too much, and I covered it in the EVO XL, but this one is different. This one is the same as the original EVO. Now, things must have changed, because when I reviewed the original EVO 2 years ago, that was the first time LIAN introduced this upright GPU that sits in the side radiator spot. Now, that version of that bracket was, I think, was pretty awful. It didn't work very well. You actually had to mount the bracket to the top of the chassis, not the side rad bracket, to the top of the chassis. You had to slide your GPU in, which was on another bracket. You had to feed your cables through the top. It was a bit of a nightmare. Now, apparently they say this one is the same as on the EVO, but this one is different. So I think they might have changed it along the way. This one, I would say it's in between the original EVO one that I reviewed and to the EVO XL. I think the EVO XL upright GPU bracket is absolutely amazing. You can install your GPU, you can install everything on that side rad bracket out of the case and just drop it in. Now, this one, unfortunately, because of the sizing area with this side rad bracket, you can't install it outside the case, because when you got to put it in, the upright bracket will fail on the side of the case. So you can do some of it. You can install 2 parts onto the GPU, and then you can slide the GPU up inside, lock it in, and then screw it in from the back. And you can also feed your cables in before you do all that, and it does make it a little bit easier. But to me, I still don't think it's as good as on the EVO XL, only because they've just done that. On the EVO XL, it works out better because the case is much bigger than this EVO RGB, because this is very, very similar sizing to the original EVO. And for GPU width, that's how far your GPU will go from your motherboard to the front of the case, is about 155 millimeters in width. As you can see, I've got this 4090 Strix in the B-roll I'm throwing over now, and that has the Optimus block, and that's pretty wide. I think that's about 155, 160, and that just clears. So you should be able to get that going. And then for air-cooled GPUs, obviously they're not going to be as wide because of your terminal, so you don't have to worry about that. And I do think air-cooled GPUs do look a bit better in that side upright area, because it just fills out the space a bit, especially with 40 series GPUs. As soon as you water cool them, it makes them very, very short, and it just looks a bit odd having your GPU finish just a bit further than halfway, and then you've got this space at the bottom. So that upright kit is going to retail for, I think it already does retail for, because you can already get it for the original EVO, is currently $24 on Newegg, so that's not too bad. But you will need a riser cable for that, and they're, I think, about $80 to $100 depending on what length. You need 60 centimeters, which is 600 millimeters or more, to run it from the side all the way under up into your motherboard. There's also a front panel mesh kit coming. I'm not sure on the price. It was delayed, I'm not sure why, but essentially pretty basic. That'll just change the front to the mesh, and I'm sure you can put something like 120 or 140 millimeter fans on that. And I think on the EVO, that one wasn't very expensive either. And before I wrap this video up and cover the price on the EVO RGB, I just want to go a little bit more over the build. Now for radiators, I dialed it back a bit and went with not the largest I could have. I went with 44 millimeter thick all round. These are the EKP 360s. I could have gone bigger. I could have gone 60 at the top, the bottom, and on the side, but I decided not to, as the fans are really the star of this build. As they've just launched, I really didn't want it to be overpowered by these really big, thick, chunky rads. And bear in mind, these still perform really good. And these are their newly launched, their black editions, where all of the end caps, instead of being that silvery color, they are black as well. And I think it tied in nicely with the theme as well. Rest of the hardware, the blocks are from Optimus. That is the 4090 Strix block, and then the Intel 1700 block as well. And that looks really nice with this matte black theme. And that's with the Apex Encore, the brand new board that was just released. And that memory is some really nice Viper Extreme 5. It is a 8000 kit. Who knows if it's going to do that? I haven't even checked the BIOS. It's probably running non-XMP. It'll be fun to play around and see what I can actually get on that kit. But yeah, that's pretty much it. And the coolant is the marble blue from Thermaltake. I really do like this color. I've used it in a few builds before, and then I managed to find some vinyl that matched and just did the EK rings. A tip, I've said this before, if you have an odd color coolant and you can't get the EK rings they offer in a color you want, because they only do like one blue, one red, maybe an orange. I think they do a purple and a green. There's so many other colors out there that you can do with coolant or to theme your build. Just go on Amazon, grab some vinyl, any different color you want. I have a vinyl cutter, so I can just simply cut out long strips, and then I just stick it around each fitting, and that's it. You could even just do it with a sharp knife if you don't have a vinyl cutter. It doesn't have to be perfect, because once you just need one end to be straight, which goes up against the end of the fitting, and then the rest just gets covered by the collar. So that's a little tip there to get your rings to match your coolant. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the build. The CPU is an Intel i9 14900K 4090 Strix, so it is pretty high end in this case for the amount of gear that I did manage to fit in. Now, before this video takes up too much of your time, I just want to cover the price of the O11 EVO RGB. Now, you're looking at $159.99, so basically $160 US for the black and $170 US for the white. So it's pretty much the same as what the original EVO came out. Now, I think that's pretty good. Like, they only have been doing O11s for so long now. I can't even think how many they have. They've had the original O11 Dynamic, the O11 Dynamic XL, then they had the O11 Mini, the O11 Air Mini. I think they have a revised Mini. They had the O11 PCMR. Then they had the O11 EVO, the O11 EVO XL, the O11 Vision, and now the O11 RGB. That's 10 they've got. Now, I'm sort of thinking, have they come to the stage where do they have to do something different? Like, to me, this is probably, I would say, I don't want to say this and make it sound harsh, but it's getting to the end of the road, I think, for LIAN and this O11 styling and layout. There's not much more I think they can do. I don't want to say that in a negative way. Like, by all means, they have been selling a lot of these cases, and that's why they keep on coming out with just these slight changes that you guys want. And you'll probably want new changes in the next version if they continue bringing out another O11. So something like there's only 120mm fans on the back, so you can fit 140 at the top, 140 at the bottom, 140 on the side, but you can only fit a 120 at the back. So maybe you might want 140 all around. Maybe LIAN ditch the O11 and come out with something else. I don't even know how they got the O11. Maybe they can do the O22 or something completely different. But I think it's getting to that stage where after 10 different variants of the chassis, something may have to be done to just revolutionize something and keep the everyone on the edge of their seats and just keep everything going. But in comparison to other cases that are around this price range, you got like the H9 Flow, the new Montech, I think it was the King case that was just launched, the Antec Performance 1, the AP NXC one, which we just recently covered in a build, and also the Shadowbase 800DX. Now, I've used some of those, I haven't used some, and like, to me, LIAN are pretty much, they're the veterans here. They've been doing this for a long time, and you really know you're not going to have many issues with this case, and you're going to get all the features that you need, especially at this price point. I don't want to take any digs at any of those other cases. I haven't used them all, but they're all around that price range, and I think for the price that the O11 EVO RGB it is a pretty damn good price. You are getting that extra RGB, but you aren't getting any fans, so I didn't cover that before. I just want you guys to know, do you guys want fans in your cases? To me, I don't think that fans should come in a case unless it's like a sub $70, $80 case, and maybe throw in some fans. But to me, this is still an enthusiast level. It's nothing like crazy enthusiast level, but to me, I don't think fans should be put in cases like these, and I think it's good that LIAN aren't doing that in these cases. They have their other series like the LANCool and so on. Those ones come with fans, and I think that is probably a good idea to have fans in those ones and not in this series. But anyway, I think that's pretty much it. A lot of rambling there. Overall, great case to work in. I had no issues. I think by now, after 10 iterations of this O11 series, I think LIAN should pretty much have it down pat, and it clearly shows that there's really no issues here. But anyway, I want to thank LIAN for sending this out to review. I want to thank you guys for watching, and see you in the next one.